The night was particularly dark, and the relentless rain tapped like a sad melody on the roof of Robert's car. He drove his luxury black sedan, lights reflecting on the puddles that covered the city streets. The windshield wipers rhythmically battled the droplets that fogged his view, but his mind was elsewhere, lost in the shadows of the important presentation he had ahead. This meeting was not just another item on his agenda. It was the kind that could define the future of his international business. As the headlights sliced through the darkness, Robert reviewed every point of his speech, anticipating his partner's reactions. However, as he stopped at a red light, a scene on the roadside captured his attention and diverted his meticulously aligned thoughts. Under the weak glow of a streetlight, a hunched figure stirred his compassion. A young woman, with a baby wrapped in a tattered blanket, was hunched against the cold, trying to shield the child from the merciless rain. The sight was heart-wrenching, and an internal voice urgently whispered, "Help them, don't just pass by." Robert shook his head, trying to rid himself of the intrusive thought. "It's raining, and I really don't have time right now," he argued with himself, his hand on the steering wheel trembling slightly. "Someone else will help. They have to." The light turned green, and he accelerated, trying to leave the image behind. But conscience is a tenacious adversary. The woman and the baby haunted him, a constant reminder in his rearview mirror of his own humanity and vulnerability. It wasn't long before a more sinister figure detached from the shadows. A tall man, with his hood pulled over his head, began to approach the woman threateningly. She tried to move away but tripped and fell with a muffled scream, clutching the baby tightly against her. That was too much for Robert to ignore. He hit the brakes, parked the car with a sharp stop, and jumped out, unconcerned about the rain now soaking him. The man, noticing his approach, turned around and vanished as quickly as he had appeared, swallowed by the night. Robert approached the woman, immediately noticing her blue eyes marked by fear and uncertainty. "Are you all right?" he asked, extending his hand cautiously. She looked up, surprised by the sudden presence of a stranger. "Yes, I think so," she replied hesitantly, her voice trembling more than her soaked shoulders. His gaze fell on her knee, visibly injured and at an odd angle. "Your knee doesn't look good," he observed, concerned. The woman sighed, a mix of pain and resignation. "I hurt it earlier today. That man chased me for almost 2 blocks. I fell while trying to escape." "Do you know him?" Robert asked, now with a tone loaded with concern. She shook her head, protecting the baby even closer to herself. "No, I've never seen him before. I don't know what he wanted from me. From us." Robert felt a tightening in his heart upon hearing her words. He looked around, making sure the assailant was not nearby, and then made a quick decision. "Let's get you to the hospital. It's not safe to stay here." He carefully helped her to stand, supporting her as they walked toward his car. As he settled the woman and the baby in the passenger seat, the rain lessened, as if even the sky paused to breathe. Robert knew his night was about to take a completely different turn from what was planned, but something inside him felt this was exactly where he needed to be. As he drove towards the hospital, the woman began to introduce herself. "My name is Emily White," she said, her voice still shaky, "and this is Claire, my daughter." Robert nodded, a sign that he had listened, but his eyes remained fixed on the road ahead. The important meeting would have to wait. As the car glided through the now quiet streets after the rain, Robert tried to keep his focus on the road, but his attention was continuously drawn to the woman beside him. Emily held Claire close to her chest, the child's small head hidden under the blanket she used to shield her from the cold. "How did you end up on the street in this condition?" Robert asked, breaking the silence that had settled since they left the traffic light. Emily sighed deeply, her eyes fixed on the fogged window. "My life hasn't been easy," she began, her voice low and slightly trembling. "I grew up in an abusive home. My mother died when I was 10, and my father, he never got over the loss. He took his anger out on me. When Claire was born, I knew I had to escape. I couldn't let her grow up in that environment." Robert felt a pang in his heart as he listened to Emily's words. "You are very brave," he said, admiring the strength of this woman who, even under such adverse circumstances, struggled to give her daughter a better life. Emily offered a faint smile, thanking him with a nod. "I just want Claire to have a chance to be happy, something I rarely had." Upon arriving at the hospital, Robert helped Emily out of the car, holding Claire while she balanced on her injured knee. They walked to the emergency room entrance, where he explained the situation to the receptionist, who quickly called a nurse. As Emily was being attended to, Robert filled out the necessary forms and left clear instructions to use his credit card for any medical expenses. "Please make sure she and the baby receive everything they need," he told the nurse, his tone firm and concerned. The nurse, a middle-aged woman with a sympathetic look, nodded, touched by the man's evident concern. "Don't worry, sir. We'll take care of them." Robert turned to Emily, who was seated in a wheelchair, Claire now sleeping serenely in her arms. "I need to go now, but I'll be back as soon as I can," he promised, feeling a strange reluctance to leave them. "Thank you for everything, Robert. I don't know what I would have done without your help today," Emily said, her blue eyes full of gratitude. He smiled, a nod that hid the complexity of emotions he felt. "Take care. I'll be back soon," he assured her, and with one last look at Claire, he returned to his car. On the way back to his world of business and meetings, Robert couldn't help but reflect on the unexpected twists of life. The image of Emily and Claire remained vivid in his mind, a powerful reminder of the realities that often went unnoticed in his daily routine. As he parked the car at the building where the meeting awaited him, he received an urgent call from his assistant, Alyssa, who spoke rapidly on the phone. "Sir, everyone has arrived for the meeting. You are the only one missing." "I'm already entering the elevator," Robert replied, hanging up shortly after. He took a deep breath, trying to mentally prepare for the transition from one world to another, but knowing that something inside him had irrevocably changed that rainy night. The elevator ascended slowly, while the echo of Alyssa's hurried words still reverberated in Robert's mind. He adjusted his tie, a nervous gesture more out of distraction than necessity, as he tried to push away the persistent images of Emily and Claire. "Focus, Robert. Business now," he murmured to himself, trying to summon the coolness and focus his position demanded. The sound of the elevator bell signaled his arrival at the correct floor, and he stepped out, his expressions now hardened. Alyssa awaited him outside, clearly relieved to see him. "Sir, everyone is waiting. They have asked about you twice already," she said, her tone mixing concern and relief. "Understood, Alyssa. Let's handle this now," he responded, with a brief but decisive nod. They walked together down the polished corridor to the conference room, where a group of partners and investors were restlessly stirring. As he entered, all eyes immediately turned towards him, loaded with expectations and a hint of irritation. "Robert, where have you been?" "We are behind schedule," said one of the partners, a middle-aged man with a stern expression. "I apologize for the delay. I had an unexpected issue," Robert replied, keeping his voice steady and composed. "But I am here now, and we can begin. Let's focus on what's important." Without waiting for more questions, he moved to the head of the table, opened his laptop, and started his presentation. The slides projected on the wall displayed graphs and future projections, each meticulously prepared to persuade and convince. As he spoke, his mind occasionally drifted to Emily and Claire, but he used each memory as a catalyst to boost his performance. The meeting, initially tense due to his delay, gradually transformed. The expressions of those present softened, replaced by nods of agreement and murmurs of approval. Robert, with his usual skill, navigated through complex questions and hypothetical scenarios, defending his positions with the precision of an experienced strategist. As the hours passed, the charged atmosphere gave way to a palpable feeling of accomplishment. When the last slide was presented and the last question answered, a respectful silence filled the room. It was Alyssa who broke the silence, her face lit up with a proud smile. "Congratulations, sir. for once again closing an incredible deal. It was exceptional, even with the delay. Robert nodded, allowing himself a brief moment of satisfaction before closing his laptop. Thank you, everyone, for your patience and engagement. I appreciate the trust and assure you the results will speak for themselves. The partners stood up, approaching to shake hands and pat backs, each echoing Alyssa's sentiments. As the room emptied, Robert remained for a moment, his thoughts now entirely focused on the woman and child at the hospital. Alyssa, could you please wrap things up here? I need to check on something before ending the day, he said, already heading towards the door. Of course, sir. All is well here, she replied as he hurried out, his mind already calculating how long it would take to return to the hospital. As he reached the parking lot of the building, Robert realized he couldn't simply return to his routine. Something about that rainy night had altered his perspective, and he knew he needed to see Emily and Claire again to ensure they were safe and well cared for. As he drove back to the hospital, his phone rang several times, but he ignored it, focused on his new priority. As twilight began to cast its shadows across the city skyline, Robert, still in the office, gathered his partners and assistant Alyssa to share the unexpected events that had delayed him earlier. Everyone settled around the large mahogany table, the remnants of the earlier tension still palpable in the air. I understand that my delay caused concerns, but I want to explain the reason, Robert began, his serious tone capturing everyone's attention. He recounted his encounter with Emily and Claire, the rush to the hospital, and how it all had impacted his perception of what really mattered. William, one of the senior partners, crossed his arms, clearly disapproving of Robert's decision. You put the company's reputation at risk today, Robert. Acting impulsively for strangers. That is reckless. Robert remained calm, holding William's gaze firmly. I understand your concern, William, but I do not regret my decision. In moments like these, we need to remember that we are humans before we are businessmen. Alyssa, always the mediator, intervened gently. Perhaps there is a lesson here. Generosity can also be a form of leadership, William. The other partners murmured among themselves, some agreeing with Robert, others still skeptical. Ultimately, the group decided to put the matter aside, prioritizing the continuity of the business. Have a good weekend, everyone. See you Monday, Robert concluded, ending the meeting and the debate with a note of cordiality. The next day, with the morning light bathing the streets, Robert drove back to the hospital, anxious for news of Emily and Claire. His heart beat with a mix of hope and apprehension. Upon arriving at the reception, he was greeted with a polite smile from the receptionist, who promptly began to search for information in the system. Sir, it appears that Emily White and the baby were discharged at the end of the night shift, the receptionist informed him, her voice neutral. Robert furrowed his brow, the news falling like a bucket of cold water on his expectations. Did they leave any contact, any address where they went? He asked, trying to hide the urgency in his voice. The receptionist checked again, her fingers agile on the keyboard. Unfortunately, there is nothing recorded here beyond the initial care. I'm sorry, I can't help more than that. Thanking her with a nod, Robert turned away from the counter, his mind swirling with unanswered questions. He walked slowly back to his car, each step echoing his growing sense of frustration and concern. As he drove back home, the reality of the situation began to settle in. Without any clues about the whereabouts of Emily and Claire, and no immediate ways to locate them, Robert faced a weekend of uncertainties. Upon entering his home, he immediately went to his office, rummaging through his bag in search of his cell phone to see if there was any missed call or message that could be a clue. However, when he tried to turn it on, he discovered that the device was completely discharged. With a sigh of frustration, he placed the cell phone on the charger, his gaze lost in the void as he pondered the next step. That night, as he dined alone, the restlessness and concern only grew, setting the stage for a long and agonizing weekend, marked by the absence of news about Emily and Claire. That Saturday morning, the sun had barely started to spread across the sky when Robert plugged his cell phone into the charger. As he waited for the battery to gain some life, His mind was turbulent with thoughts about Emily and Claire. As soon as the phone turned on, a series of notifications popped up on the screen, all indicating transactions made with the credit card he had left with Emily at the hospital. Robert scanned the amounts and descriptions of the purchases. High-end electronics, a large-screen television, and even a gaming console. His jaw tightened in frustration and disappointment. How could she? He murmured to himself, feeling a mix of anger and betrayal. Determined to clarify the facts, he donned his coat and left, heading to the electronics store where the purchases had been made. Upon arriving at the store, the atmosphere was bustling with customers exploring the latest technological innovations. Robert immediately approached the customer service desk, where a young employee greeted him with a polite smile. "Good morning, I need help with some suspicious transactions that were made here yesterday," Robert explained, showing the notifications on his phone. The employee, somewhat surprised by the situation, called the manager. "Let's check that for you, sir," said the manager, a middle-aged woman with a serious expression. "If you can give us a description of who made these purchases, we can start from there." Robert described Emily and also mentioned the suspicious man he had seen the night of the encounter. The manager agreed to access the security camera recordings, and they headed to the back room where the monitors were kept. As the footage from the previous night appeared on the screen, Robert watched attentively, expecting to see Emily making the purchases. However, to his surprise and dismay, it was not Emily who appeared in the recording, but rather the man he had seen approaching her that rainy night. The man moved through the store aisles, selecting the most expensive items with an ease that irritated Robert. "That's the man," he pointed at the screen, anger rising within him. "But I don't see Emily with him. Were they together? Was it all a scam?" The manager paused the image, clearly showing the man's face. "We don't recognize him as one of our regular customers," she commented. "And we definitely didn't see the woman you described." Frustrated, but now with more questions than answers, Robert thanked the manager for her assistance and left the store. The possibility of having been deceived, of Emily possibly colluding with that man, gnawed at him internally. Yet something inside him still resisted believing that it was all just a ruse. Determined to uncover the whole truth, Robert decided that his next step would be to confront the man from the images directly if he could find him. With a copy of the security footage in hand and the image of the suspect etched in his mind, he got into his car, heading to the nearest police station to file a report and seek help from the authorities. Armed with the security footage and seething with a mix of determination and anger, Robert arrived at the local police station. The corridors were bustling, filled with the characteristic hum of a busy morning. He approached the reception desk, where a uniformed police officer greeted him with a look of professional caution. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, noting the tense expression on Robert's face. "Yes, I need to report a fraud and possibly a case of manipulation." "I believe this man," Robert said, handing over a copy of the security recording to the officer, "is involved, and he might be trying to harm an innocent woman." The officer reviewed the footage briefly and called in a detective. Robert explained the entire situation, from his encounter with Emily and Claire to the discovery of the fraudulent purchases. The detective, a middle-aged man with a penetrating gaze, listened attentively and agreed to help. "Let's see what we can do to locate this man. You said you have his address, right?" the detective asked. With assistance from the electronics store, Robert had obtained the address of the suspect, which was registered for the delivery of the purchased items. Armed with this information, Robert, the detective, and a team of police officers headed to the indicated area, a worn-down and impoverished neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. Upon arrival, the detective coordinated a cautious approach. The narrow streets and dilapidated houses painted a picture of neglect. Robert felt growing tension. Each step brought them closer to the man he had seen in the security footage. Suddenly, as they turned a corner, Robert spotted the man. "There he is!" he exclaimed, pointing. The suspect, realizing he was being watched, began to run. The officers sprang into action, chasing the man through the tight alleyways. After several tense minutes, they managed to apprehend him, handcuffing him as he struggled to break free. Back at the station, the man, who was identified as Marcos, was placed in an interrogation room. Robert watched through the one-way glass as the detective began the interrogation. "Why were you using someone else's credit card to purchase expensive items?" the detective asked, his voice calm yet authoritative. Marcos looked down, his hands trembling slightly. "It was Emily. She gave me the card. Said I could use it to buy some things," he claimed, his voice faltering. Robert, listening from behind the glass, felt a wave of frustration and disbelief. He and the officers exchanged skeptical looks. "He's lying," Robert muttered to himself, almost unable to believe that Emily could be involved. But doubt began to set in, leaving an uncomfortable feeling. "Let's verify this story," the detective said, leaving the room to continue the investigation. Meanwhile, Robert sat in the waiting room of the station, his thoughts swirling. Everything seemed increasingly complicated, and he knew he needed to keep a cool head to uncover the truth. After the tumultuous interrogation, Robert felt powerless and confused. He decided to let the police and his lawyer, a competent professional named Samuel, handle the case. In the days that followed, he dove back into work, trying to push thoughts of Emily, Claire, and the mysterious Marcos from his mind. However, uncertainty continued to echo in his thoughts, a persistent shadow over his days. 2 weeks of restlessness and hard work passed when, on a quiet afternoon, Robert's cell phone vibrated with a call from an unknown number. He was in the middle of a meeting and ignored the call, assuming it could be a salesperson or some sort of spam. When the phone rang again, he silenced it without looking. The third time, curiosity and an inexplicable sense of urgency made him answer. "Hello," he spoke, his voice tinged with slight irritation from the interruption. On the other end, there was a pause, and then a female voice, tremulous and hesitant, spoke quickly. "I'm sorry, I was forced to do this," said the voice, and before Robert could respond, the line was cut off, leaving a buzzing silence in his ear. Robert stood still, holding the phone still to his ear, trying to process the words. "Forced to do what?" he murmured to himself, perplexed. The voice seemed familiar, but the rapidity of the call left him doubting his own senses. Returning to the table, he stared at the cell phone display, hoping the person would call back, but the phone remained silent. "Is this another trick?" he thought, suspicion now a constant companion. Making a quick decision, he left the conference room and went straight to Samuel's office. "Samuel, I just received a strange call. A woman said she was forced to do this and then hung up. I need to find out if it was Emily. Can you trace the number?" Samuel, always pragmatic and efficient, nodded while already starting to type on his laptop. "Let's see what we can find out, Robert. These calls could be a breakthrough or a new layer of this confusion." As Samuel worked, Robert sat down, his mind racing. The uncertainty about the intention behind the call consumed him. If it was Emily, why would she call after all this time? And what had she been forced to do? The possibility that she might be in danger began to take shape in his mind, bringing with it a new sense of urgency. Samuel finally looked up, his expression serious. "The number is from a public phone, which complicates things a bit. But it's located in an area close to where you said you first encountered Emily. It's worth investigating." With this new information, Robert felt a renewed determination. "Let's go then," he said, picking up his car keys. "If there's any chance this could lead us to Emily and clarify this whole situation, then I need to check it out personally." They left the office, the sky already darkening as they headed to the location of the phone booth, each lost in their thoughts about what they might discover when they arrived there. Robert and Samuel arrived at the location where the phone booth was situated, a dark corner on a poorly lit street. The public telephone, an almost forgotten relic of urban communication, seemed an anachronistic point in the modern landscape. "I'll try calling the number back," Robert said, pulling out his cell phone. His fingers hesitated for a moment before dialing the number from the received call. As the phone rang, he felt a mix of hope and apprehension. Finally, The call was answered. "Hello. Is this you, Emily?" "If that is your real name," Robert said, his voice tinged with suspicion. There was a pause on the other end. Then, a tearful and clearly distressed voice responded. "Yes, it's me, Robert. I'm so sorry for everything. I was forced to give the card to Marcos. He's a loan shark. He was threatening me and my daughter. I tried to escape, but he found us." Robert's heart raced as he heard the confirmation of his suspicions and fears. "Emily, where are you now? I need more details. How did he find you? And how did he threaten you?" She sobbed before responding, her voice still shaky. I'm hiding now. He found me a day after I left the hospital. Marcos knew where I used to go. He forced me to give him the card, saying that if I didn't, something bad would happen to Claire. Emily's anguish was palpable, even through the distance. "Please, Robert, you need to believe me. I'm sending you the address where I am now. You can come and check my documents, see for yourself who I am." Robert quickly noted down the address Emily provided. "I'm on my way. Stay where you are and don't talk to anyone else about this," he instructed, while Samuel, who was beside him, listened intently. As soon as he hung up, Robert turned to Samuel. "She's in danger, Samuel. We need to help her." Samuel nodded, his expression grave. "I'll contact the police to make sure we have support. We don't know what kind of situation we're going to find." Together, they returned to the car and drove to the address provided by Emily. The journey was silent, both men lost in their thoughts about the possible implications of what they were about to discover. Upon arriving at the location, a worn-down building in an even more forgotten area of the city, Robert felt a knot form in his stomach. "I hope we're still in time," he murmured as they climbed the steps to the indicated apartment. Robert knocked on the door, his heart pounding with anticipation and fear. Moments later, the door slowly opened, and Emily appeared, visibly shaken but alive. She quickly let them in, looking nervously down the hallway before closing the door. Inside the apartment, Robert could see documents scattered over a small dining table, evidence of Emily's life, perhaps enough to clarify everything. But before they could talk further, Robert's phone rang again, interrupting the moment. It was his lawyer with urgent news about Marcos. In the days following the visit to Emily's apartment, Robert and Samuel worked tirelessly to unravel each piece of the puzzle that involved Emily's life. The urgency of the situation motivated them at every step as they awaited the promised information from Robert's lawyer. Finally, on a humid and stuffy afternoon, Robert's phone rang. It was his lawyer, Thomas, whose tone of voice indicated both relief and concern. "Robert, I have good news and some important confirmations," Thomas began. "We have managed to verify Emily's identity through a series of documents and records. She is indeed who she says she is, Emily White, daughter of Edward White. And her father has a disturbing history with several assault complaints registered against him." Robert felt a mix of relief and anxiety upon hearing these words. "This explains a lot, Thomas. But it also increases my concern for her and little Claire's safety. We need to act quickly." "I fully agree," Thomas replied. "I will continue to investigate and keep you informed of any developments." After hanging up, Robert grabbed his cell phone with renewed determination. He dialed Emily's number, hoping to speak with her about the findings and discuss the next steps to ensure her safety. The phone rang several times before Emily finally answered. "Robert," her voice sounded cautious and slightly tremulous. "Emily, it's me. I received some important information from my lawyer that we need to discuss. Are you in a safe place right now?" Robert asked, his voice laden with concern. Before Emily could respond, a loud bang interrupted the conversation. Robert heard the sound of something heavy hitting what seemed to be a door. "Emily, what's happening there?" he exclaimed, his heart racing with the fear of what that might mean. "Robert, Emily began, but was interrupted by another bang, followed by muffled screams. The phone fell, and the sound of fighting and confusion took over the environment. "Emily!" Robert shouted into the phone, unable to do more than listen. The sound of a door being broken down and more screams filled his ears, increasing his desperation. Not knowing what else to do, Robert rushed to his car, the phone still pressed to his ear, listening to the sounds of a fight that seemed to grow more violent. As he drove back to Emily's apartment, he tried to remain calm, but fear and worry dominated his thoughts. Approaching the location, the sound of sirens could already be heard in the distance. The call was still connected, but only indistinct noises and occasional words from Emily could be heard. Robert parked the car hastily and ran towards the building, hoping to find Emily safe but fearing the worst. Robert raced down the hallway of Emily's building, the phone pressed against his ear as he listened to the sounds of struggle and desperation from the other side of the line. "Did Marcos go after her?" he shouted to the lawyer, who was still on the phone, trying to coordinate a response with the police. "He escaped custody a few days ago," the lawyer said, his voice tense, conveying the gravity of the situation. "Sorry, Robert. I didn't think it was important to inform you earlier. We didn't think he would attempt something so direct. This is crucial, Thomas. We need the police now," Robert exclaimed as he climbed the stairs, taking two at a time. "I'm heading to her apartment. Do whatever you can to bring help." As soon as he reached Emily's floor, Robert headed to her apartment with his heart pounding furiously in his chest. The hallway was eerily silent, but the muffled sounds of fighting still came through the phone, giving him an even greater sense of urgency. He reached the door, which was ajar, a clear sign of forced entry visible on the damaged lock. "Emily!" he called out as he pushed the door open and entered. The apartment was in disarray, furniture overturned and personal items scattered across the floor. The sound of a struggle came from the bedroom at the end of the hallway. Robert advanced through the apartment, his heart loud in his ears. As he approached the bedroom, the sounds of fighting intensified. With a push, he opened the bedroom door and saw Emily struggling to free herself from a man that Robert immediately recognized as Marcos. "Let her go," Robert shouted, moving in to intervene. Marcos, surprised by the sudden interruption, released Emily and turned to face Robert. "You shouldn't be here," Marcos growled, positioning himself defensively. Emily, trembling and with tears in her eyes, retreated to a corner of the room, watching the scene with evident terror. Without hesitation, Robert advanced on Marcos, using all the adrenaline the moment demanded. They fought, a tense physical confrontation that knocked more furniture around. As they struggled, Robert managed to land a blow that caused Marcos to stumble backward, crashing against the wall. "Robert, I'm okay," Emily managed to say, her voice a tremulous whisper. At that moment, the sounds of approaching sirens could be heard in the distance. The police, finally alerted by the lawyer, were arriving. Robert kept Marcos subdued, waiting for the police to enter and take control of the situation. As he held Marcos, relief at having arrived in time mixed with anger over the danger Emily and Claire had faced. He knew the next few hours would be crucial to ensure Marcos no longer posed a threat. "It's all right now, Emily. It's all right," Robert repeated, trying to calm both himself and her as the police finally burst through the apartment, ready to take charge of the situation. Robert's heart raced frantically as he drove at high speed through the nearly empty streets, each traffic light and curve intensifying the tension that already consumed him. The urgency to reach Emily's apartment before something worse happened propelled him, making him almost completely ignore the speed limits. As soon as he arrived at the building, he parked the car with a jolt and ran out, not even bothering to lock the door. Adrenaline pulsed through his veins as he crossed the lobby and climbed the stairs, taking 2 steps at a time, not waiting for the elevator. Each step was guided by the sound of Emily's despair still echoing in his mind. Reaching the hallway of her apartment, Robert saw the door ajar. Without hesitation, he entered, his heart pounding against his chest. Inside the apartment, the sounds of struggle were clear and directed Robert straight to Emily's bedroom. There, he found Marcos trying to force his way into the room, where Emily was evidently locked in. Without a second thought, Robert yelled, "Marcos, step away from her now!" Surprised by Robert's sudden arrival, Marcos turned around with an expression of fury. "This is none of your business, Robert," he growled, advancing towards Robert with brutal determination. Although not a professional fighter, Robert had trained in some forms of personal defense and was prepared to use all his skills. He positioned himself defensively, sizing up his opponent, and when Marcos charged, Robert used Marcos's own momentum against him, dodging and applying an arm lock that brought him to the ground with a grunt of pain. "She will never be your property, Marcos. This ends now," Robert shouted, keeping Marcos immobilized on the ground. At that moment, the police, alerted by Samuel, finally arrived, storming into the apartment with quick and firm steps. They quickly assessed the situation and handcuffed Marcos, who still tried to struggle. With Marcos now under police custody, Robert turned to the bedroom door, which was locked. "Emily, it's me, Robert. It's all safe now. You can open the door." There was a pause, and then the sound of locks being undone. The door slowly opened, and Emily appeared, visibly shaken, her eyes red and swollen from tears. Upon seeing Robert, she ran to him, embracing him tightly. "Robert, I don't know what I would have done without you. Thank you for not giving up on me," she sobbed, clinging to him as if she never wanted to let go. Robert comforted her, holding her tightly. "You'll never have to face something like this alone again, Emily. We'll make sure he can't hurt you again," he promised, feeling a mix of relief and anger thinking about the terror she had endured. As the police began to ask questions and process the scene, Robert stayed by Emily's side, ensuring she felt safe and protected. However, despite the immediate relief, he knew there were still challenges ahead. They would need to face the legal and emotional consequences of what had happened. In the days following the confrontation with Marcos, Emily's life began to take a new direction under Robert's protection and care. Although the trauma of the incident still loomed over her like a shadow, Robert's constant and reassuring presence offered a counterpoint of safety and comfort. Robert became a constant figure in Emily's apartment, helping her to rebuild not just the physical space that had been damaged, but also the confidence she needed to move forward. He brought in painters and carpenters, transforming the formerly somber environment into a warm and bright home. "How are you feeling today, Emily?" Robert would ask during one of his daily visits, while Claire played with a new set of toys on the living room floor. "A bit better, Robert. Seeing the apartment transform helps me believe that things can really change for the better," Emily would respond, offering him a shy smile, which Robert returned with affection. As the weeks passed, Robert and Emily began to go out together, initially to open and calm spaces like parks and gardens, where Claire could play while they talked about everything except the recent trauma. It was during these outings that Robert realized how much his affection for Emily had grown, a feeling that began to intertwine with his admiration for her strength and resilience. "You're incredible, Emily. Not just for everything you've gone through, but for the way you're rebuilding your life," Robert confessed on a sunny afternoon as they watched Claire chase butterflies. Emily blushed slightly, touched by his words. "I couldn't have done it without you, Robert. You came at just the right time and changed everything for the better." Despite the growing romantic atmosphere, Robert knew that Emily's recovery journey was far from over. They faced legal challenges, with the case against Marcos still ongoing, and regular visits to the therapist to help Emily cope with the trauma. "Every day is a step forward, Emily. And I'll be here with you at every step," he promised, holding her hand as they walked back home after a day outdoors. However, despite the new beginnings and the growing bond between them, the reality of legal and emotional complications sometimes cast a shadow over their moments of happiness. As they prepared to face the next chapter of their lives, Robert knew the path ahead would still demand a lot from both of them. It was a quiet afternoon, and as Claire slept after a long day of play, Robert and Emily sat together on the couch, sharing a moment of silence. Robert's phone rang, breaking the calm of the moment. It was his lawyer, with news about the case against Marcos, a conversation they knew to be inevitable, but still, they hesitated to begin. As the days passed, Robert and Emily worked together on rebuilding her life, striving to leave the remnants of the trauma behind. Using his extensive resources and contacts, Robert found a new apartment for Emily and Claire in a safer, more tranquil area of the city. The move was not just physical. It represented a fresh start, a chance to begin anew with greater security and hope. "Look, Emily, this place has 24-hour security and a beautiful park right next door. Claire is going to love it," Robert explained as they toured the new apartment. The freshly painted walls and spacious rooms bathed in sunlight brought a glimpse of a brighter future. Emily looked around, holding Claire's hand, her eyes lighting up a bit as she imagined a life without constant fear. "It's perfect, Robert. I don't know how to thank you for everything you're doing for us," she said, her voice laden with gratitude. "You don't need to thank me, Emily. Seeing you two safe and happy is all I need," Robert replied, genuinely pleased to be able to help. Despite these promising new beginnings, the threat of Marcos and his connections still cast a shadow over the new life they were trying to build. During a quiet afternoon, while they were organizing some of Emily's belongings in the new apartment, Robert received a call from his lawyer that made his heart stop. "Robert, we have a problem," the lawyer said as soon as Robert answered the phone. "It seems Marcos was not acting alone. He had allies, and our information suggests they are not pleased with his arrest. They might try something against Emily to get revenge or to try to intimidate her before the trial." Robert's blood ran cold at these words. He looked at Emily, who was playing with Claire, completely unaware of the new threat. "What can we do? We need to protect them," he asked, his voice tense. "I'm working with the police to enhance security around Emily and Claire. Additionally, I recommend that we consider additional personal protection measures for them. It might be prudent to hire private security until this is resolved," the lawyer suggested. Robert immediately agreed, determined to do whatever was necessary to ensure Emily and Claire's safety. "Please organize that. Keep me informed of any developments." Hanging up the phone, Robert approached Emily, his expression serious. "Emily, we need to talk. There's a new situation we need to discuss," he began, preparing to explain the new threat looming over them. Together, they spent the afternoon planning how to deal with this new threat, determined to protect the peace they were trying so hard to rebuild. The conversation was grave and necessary, a mix of precautions and promises, as they planned how to keep their small rebuilt family safe. As the sun set, bringing twilight to the end of the day, Robert felt a mix of determination and apprehension. He knew that despite the challenges, he would not give up on fighting for Emily and Claire's safety and happiness. The shadow of Marcos and his allies would not darken the future they were trying to build together. Emily and Claire's life began to stabilize thanks to Robert's unwavering support. He not only secured a safe home for them but also endeavored to help Emily find a job that met her financial needs and gave her a sense of purpose and fulfillment. Robert utilized his extensive network of professional contacts to find suitable opportunities for Emily, ensuring she could work in a safe and welcoming environment. "How did the interview go today, Emily?" Robert asked during a quiet dinner in their new home. Claire played on the floor beside them, a joyful smile lighting up her face as she stacked colorful wooden blocks. Emily looked at Robert, her eyes sparkling with a mix of gratitude and hope. "It was amazing, Robert. The manager seemed really impressed with my experience. And the work environment. It's so welcoming. I think I'm going to really enjoy working there," she shared, the emotion evident in her voice. Robert smiled, pleased. "I knew you would impress them. You have so many skills and so much to offer, Emily. I'm so happy for you." As the days passed, Robert and Emily spent more and more time together, not just sharing responsibilities for Claire, but also exploring new hobbies and interests together. Whether visiting a new museum, watching a movie, or just walking through the local park, each moment together strengthened the bond between them. One afternoon, as they watched Claire play in the park, Robert took Emily's hand. "You know, Emily, I never imagined my life would change so much in such a short time. Since you and Claire came into it, everything seems brighter, more complete," he confessed, looking into her eyes. Emily squeezed Robert's hand, her heart warmed by his words. "I feel the same, Robert. You brought us safety and joy. I don't know how we would have done it without you," she replied, her voice gentle. The conversation continued, with both sharing dreams and plans for the future, imagining all the possibilities that now seemed within reach. However, even with the growing sense of normality and happiness, Robert remained vigilant, always alert to any signs of danger. He was determined to protect Emily and Claire at all costs, never forgetting the threats that might still be lurking. As they planned a small picnic for the following weekend, Robert thought about how to further strengthen security around them. "Maybe we should consider some personal safety classes, just to be prepared," he suggested, ever thoughtful. Emily agreed, recognizing the prudence in Robert's suggestion. "I think that would be a good idea, especially to feel more confident and protected," she said, appreciating Robert's constant concern for their safety. That evening in the park was one of many moments that marked the beginning of a new phase in their lives. With each passing day, the shadow of the past became less intimidating, replaced by the light of a promising future they were building together, one day at a time. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Robert, Emily, and Claire settled into a tranquil routine life filled with small pleasures and daily discoveries. They established a routine that interwove their lives in such a way that each day seemed to bring a new reason to be thankful. Claire was growing quickly, her laughter the soundtrack of their days, and her insatiable curiosity the spark for many family adventures. One serene afternoon, as they sat in their garden watching Claire play, Robert held Emily's hand. "Can you believe how much our lives have changed?" he asked, a warm smile on his lips. Emily looked at him, her eyes shining with a mix of gratitude and love. "Sometimes it feels like a dream, one that I never want to end," she replied, squeezing his hand. "You've transformed our lives, Robert, in ways I never imagined possible." It was true. What had begun as a compassionate gesture on a rainy night had evolved into a deep emotional connection. They had woven a tapestry of life together that neither had anticipated, but now neither could imagine any other way. "I will always be here for you too, no matter what happens. We will face anything together," Robert said, determined. Emily nodded, knowing that with Robert by her side, she could face anything. As the sun set, painting the sky with vibrant colors, a figure approached their home's gate. It was Samuel, the lawyer, with a solemn expression that immediately made Robert stand up. "Robert, Emily, sorry to interrupt, but we need to talk," Samuel began, looking seriously at both of them. "I received a call from the police. There's news about Marcos, and apparently, about something you need to know." Robert and Emily exchanged a concerned look, each feeling a twinge of anxiety about what was to come. "What happened, Samuel?" Robert asked, his tone steady. "Marcos. He made a full confession. But it's not just about the crimes we knew," Samuel explained, pausing to ensure he had their attention. "He revealed he was being manipulated, part of a larger scheme that involves some quite influential people in the city. And, Emily, it seems your father was involved." The shock of this revelation hit Emily like a physical blow. "My father? But how?" "He never mentioned." "Yes, it seems he was deep in debt with some dangerous people. Marcos was being used to pressure you, to manipulate situations that benefited your father without your knowing," Samuel continued, each word weighing in the air. Emily's past, which they thought they had left behind, had resurfaced with a twist none of them expected. What had started as a redemption story now intertwined with a plot of deeper intrigues and mysteries. Robert squeezed Emily's hand, reaffirming his silent commitment to face any challenges that came their way. "What does this mean for us?" Emily asked, her voice shaky. "We'll find out together," Robert responded, his determination clear. "Nothing will tear us apart." Thus, amid startling revelations, Robert, Emily, and Claire prepared to face the ramifications of this new threat, united and resilient. Their story was far from over, each new page a promise of struggles, but also of unshakable hope and love. They now knew that, no matter what fate held, they would face it together as a family.
So, if you're not subscribed yet, click on the subscribe button below and join our community. Thank you for your support and see you in the next videos.